Is it worth it to be a psychiatric nurse practitioner? That's the question we are addressing today. My name is David Warren, and if you're new to this channel, consider subscribing. My content is all about being a nurse practitioner and being a CRNA student. And today we're going to talk about, is it worth it to be a psychiatric nurse practitioner? We're going to go through what a psych nurse practitioner is, salary potential, what the job environment is like. And at the end of the video, I'm going to tell you whether or not I truly believe it is worth it to be a psych nurse practitioner. So for full disclosure, I'm not a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I know people who are, and I have friends who are psychiatric nurse practitioners and work in that particular specialty. This is something that I considered before I landed on going back to CRNA school and furthering my education that way. I really considered being a psychiatric nurse practitioner. And I want to share with you my thought process on that, kind of what I thought about it and how I determined what was best for my life and my career choice. And at the end of the video, I'll tell you whether or not I still think it's worth it to stick with it and be a psych nurse practitioner. So the first point I want to hit on is, what is a psychiatric nurse practitioner? And that really opens up the broader aspect of advanced practice nursing. What is a nurse practitioner? So a nurse practitioner is an advanced practice nurse who has undergone extensive training in a particular population focus, like family health, geriatrics, pediatrics, adult acute care, psychiatric, women's health, whatever that population focus is, the nurse practitioner has undergone extensive training in that particular area. And so it's really no different with psychiatric care. A psychiatric nurse practitioner is a nurse who goes back to school, takes advanced courses in pharmacology, pathophysiology, advanced assessment, and then courses in the management of psychiatric disorders across the lifespan. And so that's one of the major points that I want to emphasize to you is that psychiatric nurse practitioners work across the lifespan. It's not limited to like a pediatric or a geriatric or an adult focus. It's really across the lifespan, much like a family nurse practitioner is certified in family medicine across the lifespan. A psychiatric nurse practitioner is certified in psychiatric care across the lifespan. And it's either a master's degree, a doctoral degree, or what we call a postmaster certificate. And the master's and doctoral degree are obviously self-explanatory. The postmaster certificate is for someone like such as myself who already has a master's degree in nursing. If I wanted to go back and obtain a psychiatric nurse practitioner certification, I would enroll in the program and complete the courses required to sit for the national certification exam. But I wouldn't get like another master's degree out of it, if that makes sense. There's less hours involved. I wouldn't have to retake some of the classes that I already have under my belt. Now, if I wanted to obtain a second master's degree, I'm sure that would be possible. I would have to take extra classes to do that. So at the end of your training as a psychiatric nurse practitioner, you would sit for a national certification exam, which would certify you as a psychiatric nurse practitioner. And then you would obtain state licensure within whatever state you're going to practice in. And then you would follow the laws based on whatever that state is. If they require physician supervision, if there's no physician supervision, whatever the methods and the laws are for that particular state is what you would follow. And then I forgot to mention, in the course of your program, obviously you would do clinical rotations in psychiatric care across the lifespan. A minimum, I believe, is 500 hours that would be required for that. Most programs require 700 to 800 hours from what I have seen myself and for what I've done some research on. You can go to these programs online. So there are some brick and mortar programs, but there are a vast majority of online nurse practitioner programs. This isn't really the video to discuss online nurse practitioner education. I certainly have an opinion about that, but that's really not for this video. But just know that you can do online schooling for a psychiatric nurse practitioner certificate or master's or doctoral degree. You can also do brick and mortar programs. I would say from my experience, the online education is way more popular than the brick and mortar program for Psych NP. So some of the classes that you would be taking, as I mentioned earlier, the pathophysiology, pharmacology, and physical assessment. You would also take courses in the psychiatric management of care, courses directed at psychotherapy, psychopharmacology, things that you would be doing day in and day out as a psychiatric nurse practitioner. So that's a little bit about the education model and what a psychiatric nurse practitioner is. Now I want to talk a little bit about the population. We kind of hit on that in the first segment there, but the population is patients with psychiatric psychiatric and mental health disorders. So what does that look like? Depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, schizoaffective disorder, all of the psychiatric issues that come with human nature. That's what you would be dealing with. That's the population that you would be taking care of. And again, that's that's across the lifespan. So really birth till death. And you can specialize in certain areas. Like if you only wanted to do teenagers with ADHD, you could probably specialize in that area once you got out in practice. Or if you just wanted to do broad mental health, you could do a little bit of everything. Or if you wanted to specialize in geriatrics, you could certainly do that after you graduate. But that's the population that you would be working with, psychiatric patients. And I do want to mention this, and that's the fact that you have very very little lateral mobility. That's quite a confusing term. Try to say that 5 times. Very little lateral mobility. All right, I'm going to edit that out. No, I'm just kidding. If you're watching this, you'll know I didn't edit that out. Back to the original point. Very little lateral mobility, and what I mean by that is, as other nurse practitioners in their area of focus, such as myself being a family nurse practitioner and adult acute care, there's a little more lateral mobility within those realms, because as a family nurse practitioner, you can work in family medicine, you can work in internal medicine, you can work in urgent care, you could go to a specialty clinic or work in cardiology or pulmonology. You can work in a variety of different areas. If you don't like something, you can switch it up. And that's really the cool part about being a family nurse practitioner or an adult acute care nurse practitioner, is you can switch it up a little bit. Now, the adult acute care has a little less lateral mobility than the family nurse practitioner, but it's still there. If you wanted to work in like the neuro ICU, you could, or if you wanted to work in inpatient cardiology or trauma ICU. See, there's more mobility within that specialty, whereas a psychiatric nurse practitioner, there's not as much of that, because you're really confined to that particular area, psychiatric care. Now, sure, you could do across the lifespan. You could work pediatrics and then go to adolescent and then go to adult and then to geriatrics, or, there's a combination of things that you could do, but you're really limited to psychiatric care. And so that's maybe one of the downsides that I would see. And it's not necessarily a downside. It's potentially a downside 10 years down the road if you think you may want to do something different and you don't have that flexibility to do that. However, if you know for certain, hey, I want to work in psych and just do psychiatric care, certainly this is the place for you. And I would compare that to CRNA school, actually. So being a CRNA, there's not much lateral mobility in the anesthesia world or anesthesia realm. You can do anesthesia with different populations. It's much like psychiatric care. You were trained across the lifespan, birth till death, for any anesthetic issues or complications, or doing anesthetics across the lifespan. But there's little lateral mobility. Here we go with my little catchphrase again. As a CRNA, you can work in outpatient pain management. There's a little more flexibility in there, but still it's quite limited because the scope is so narrow. And then when you think of like a family nurse practitioner, the scope is very wide. So psychiatric care, the scope is going to be very narrow, but you're going to learn way, way, way more in depth than you would in, say, a family nurse practitioner program. And so that's a little bit about the population and the lateral mobility issue. The other thing I would say is, as a family nurse practitioner, we're trained in minor psychiatric care, such as anxiety and depression. However, if you get outside kind of depression, anxiety, and some of those surface level issues, then you need to be referring the patient for psychiatric care. So it wouldn't be within my scope to be managing a panel of schizophrenia patients on their psychiatric medications, just because that's not something I was trained in. That's something more in line with a psychiatric nurse practitioner, because you get that in-depth view and in-depth knowledge about psychiatric care, versus a family nurse practitioner. You just get that surface level stuff. And so the scope is quite deep for a psychiatric nurse practitioner. Okay, so that's what a psychiatric nurse practitioner is, about their training, their work environment, the population that they work with. Now let's talk about, is it worth it to do that? Is it really worth it? So the first point I want to hit on is the salary. And so that's what people tend to look at the most, is the salary that psychiatric nurse practitioners make. And in my research for this video, it is very common for psychiatric nurse practitioners to make anywhere from about $150,000 up upwards of $200,000 to almost $300,000 a year. It's very lucrative, and it is very enticing whenever you are trying to determine, hey, is this something that I want to do? Is this something that I'm interested in? And you see the salary pop up and you're like, holy cow, that's a lot of money. That's probably, if not the highest pay for a nurse practitioner that you're going to come across. Now, there are some areas, if you're doing locums or if you're doing something of that nature, sure, you're probably going to make a little more than that. But if you just want to go out and get a job anywhere in the country, probably $150,000 to $200,000 is going to be well within, probably on the low side of what you would make as a psychiatric nurse practitioner. Now, this is where I want to stop for a second. If you are a psychiatric nurse practitioner, comment below if you're comfortable sharing your salary. Let me know what you make, or if you know what people make in your particular area. I would love to hear it. I'm very interested in that. But I would say anywhere from $150,000 upwards of $200,000 is common. Just in surface level research on Psych NP salaries, that's probably what you're looking at making if you want to go anywhere. Now, you can find more than that, obviously, if you want to go to rural America and work with the underserved population. Psychiatric patients are underserved in general, but if you want to go to a more rural area where there's no psychiatric care, you could probably make more than that. But that is kind of the first point that I want to make to you, is the salary. And that's something that people look at and they're automatically enticed by it and they want to go down that route. So we'll come back to that here in just a moment. But number 2 point I want to make to you is the schedule and the environment. And that's something that's also attractive and lucrative to people looking to join this profession. That's something that struck with me probably the most, is the environment and the schedule. And that is the fact that you can do remote telehealth. And there are jobs really all over where you can be wherever you want to be and you can see your panel of patients. And I think that's really cool. That's something that would draw me to the profession, honestly, is being able to do remote telehealth medicine. And in psychiatric care, that's probably one of the only areas as a nurse practitioner that you can get away with doing good telehealth and having a steady flow of income and a steady job doing that. I've looked personally, just for my own knowledge and just browsing around, if as a family nurse practitioner, there aren't that many telehealth opportunities. There are some, but not that many. There are, by far, the vast majority of telehealth jobs are going to be psychiatric care. And it could either be with a private clinic, it could be with a big corporation that just does the online platform. It could be really with a hospital system. There are just so many options as to where you could work and what that environment looks like. And the schedule, it's really going to depend on where you work. So it could be Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. It could be shift work if you're working with one of these big online platforms. I've done some research on these online platforms. I'm not going to mention who they are because I don't really endorse any of that. But you could go look online at some of these big online platforms that provide psychiatric care and see that you could get a job and you might be able to work like an overnight shift and see patients on that overnight shift. However, that's going to be less likely if you are working in like a big hospital or a clinic where it's a small business and you're only open like during the day or something. You'll see your panel of patients more during the day. Now, with that being said, doing telehealth is not the only option. You certainly can do in-person work. But for me personally, that's one of the things when I was looking at this career that really drew me to it, is the fact that I could work remotely. And that's one of the things, this is not the video for that, but that's one of the things when I look back at my career choice and I'm like, man, I should have went into like IT or computer engineering or something like that. Something that you can work remote. I see these like vlogs online about people going to like Bali and doing their remote work, and way off topic for this video, but I find that stuff interesting. And I think being a psych nurse practitioner would provide you with that opportunity if that's what you wanted to do. If you wanted to go get a job at a clinic and see patients face to face, certainly you could do that as well. That is an option, and that is a big portion of what psychiatric nurse practitioners do. They just don't work remotely. You can work in the clinic seeing patients face to face as well. And so that's a little bit about the schedule and the environment. As far as places you would work, again, it could be a clinic, it could be a big hospital, it could be an online platform. There are just a wide variety of areas or places, environments that you could work in. And another one of those would be opening your own clinic. And this is certainly not the video for talking about the business aspect of being a nurse practitioner, but you could open your own clinic, pending that you're in a state that there is legality for that. So, there's not like a supervision requirement. Still, even with a supervision requirement, you can open your own practice. You just have to have a supervising physician, and that can be kind of troublesome to come by. But if you work in a place like Alaska where there's no requirement for a supervising physician, then you can open your own clinic and start there. And your clinic and your business, you're probably going to have plenty of patients show up because psychiatric care is so undervalued and non-existent. And I know that just from my time in emergency medicine. We have psych patients that come through the ER, and if they need inpatient psychiatric care, I mean, it can be like days to weeks before these patients are placed. And so psychiatric care is certainly needed. So if you are considering this field, just know that the job opportunity looks really well. And that kind of segues into my next point, and that is the job outlook. And the job outlook looks very good for psychiatric nurse practitioners just because there's not a lot of psychiatric care providers. It is a little bit desolate out there, which is really unfortunate because, as we just said a moment ago, there are so many patients that need good psychiatric care. And the job outlook should be really good for that. However, I would caution you with this statement, and that is the job outlook is good right now. However, with almost all the nurse practitioner programs, there's a very low barrier to entry, meaning that pretty much anybody can go do it. As long as you're like breathing and have a pulse and have a nursing degree, you could go to psychiatric nurse practitioner school. And that's not bashing these programs. There are some programs that require experience, some programs that have rigorous admission standards. But in my research for this video, I came across at least 6 online nurse practitioner programs that require a nursing license and an application. And that's really it. And you can start next week. 6. I'm not going to name these programs because, like I said, I don't endorse nurse practitioner programs. I haven't been to psychiatric nurse practitioner school. This is just observation from me being a nurse practitioner, not in that specialty, but from an outside specialty looking in. This is what I see. And I know that there are far more Psych NP programs out there that don't have strict admission requirements. And that's unfortunate, I think, because at some point you're going to be churning out so many people in the specialty that it's going to become oversaturated. And I'm not saying that the psychiatric field is oversaturated now. Like I said, we have too few psychiatric providers now. But at some point, 30 years from now, if we're churning out this many psychiatric nurse practitioners, at some point that's going to catch up. And as we have seen in all the other areas, especially family nurse practitioner realm, whenever you're churning out those providers like that, it's a supply and demand issue. You have so much supply, not as much demand, and that's going to drive positions down, the number of positions down, the salary down. So those are things to think about, and that's what I thought about. That's one big thing that I thought about when I was going through the thought process of, do I want to do this or not? Is what does a job outlook look like, and what is the future of this potential career? I opted obviously for CRNA for anesthesia because there are very strict admission requirements. The barrier to entry is impossible for some people and very high for most people. You have to have critical care experience. You have to have all these chemistry classes. You have to have your CCRN. You have to take the GRE. There are just so many barriers to entry, and not a lot of people either are willing to do that or can do that. And so the ability to be admitted to those programs is significantly less than other areas like family nurse practitioners or psychiatric nurse practitioners, where there's no barrier to entry. As I just said, there's 6 programs that require an RN license and an application, and that's really it. No work experience necessary, no references, no shadowing psychiatric providers. You see what I'm saying? The outlook right now is fine, but think 30 years down the road, what's it going to be like? And so that's a point that I want to kind of bring home to you today, is think about that. And the last point I want to make to you is it's called, what I titled as passion. And you really have to have a passion for this particular population for it to be worth it. And so if you don't have a passion for taking care of the mentally ill and for the psychiatric patient, then you absolutely do not need to go to psychiatric nurse practitioner school. hands down, don't do it if you don't have a passion for that population. And that's really where it came home for me, is because I personally don't have a passion for taking care of mentally ill people. I totally respect people who do, and it's not a diss on anyone who does, and it doesn't make me look bad just because I don't want to do it. My computer screen went off. It's getting a little dark in here. There we go. Where was that? What was I saying? Passion. So you have to have a passion for that particular population. If you are not passionate about that, you're going to burn out very easily. And there are some people out there who can never imagine working as an emergency nurse practitioner like I do. And that's fine. If that's not for you, then that's not for you. I couldn't imagine myself working with psychiatric patients, mentally ill patients. It's not something that I'm passionate about. And I think to really be successful in that career, to be fulfilled, and to not get burned out, you really have to have a passion for caring for these patients. And if you don't, you're going to burn out very easily, even with the lucrative salary, even with the online positions, being able to do telehealth. There are only so many good factors before you're like, you know what, this is great. Like, I like the salary, I like the hours. I don't like what I'm doing. I don't like the patients I'm taking care of. And you're going to burn out very quickly. So just keep that in mind, that if you are not passionate about providing psychiatric care, top-notch psychiatric care, then you don't need to be a psych nurse practitioner. Don't do it for the salary. Don't do it for the schedule or the work environment. Do it because you are passionate about providing that care to that population. And that really goes kind of across the board with any profession in healthcare: CRNA, nurse practitioner, physician, residencies, whatever. Don't do it if you're not passionate about providing that particular type of care to that particular population of patient. And so don't do it for the salary. Don't do it for the work environment. Do it because you're passionate. And so that really brings me to my final point. Is it worth it? I think this is probably what you've been waiting for. Is it worth it? And my answer would be, it depends. It really depends. Is it worth it if you want to provide top-notch psychiatric care, you're passionate about that, and that's what you want to do? Yes, it is absolutely worth it. You will have a very fulfilling career. You will be compensated very well at the top of the nurse practitioner specialty. You will have a great work environment, whether it be online or in a clinic. There's so many good things that could be if that's what you truly want to do. So if you want to provide good psych care, yes, absolutely worth it. Now, on the flip side of that, if you are looking at these positions thinking, you know what, that salary looks really good, I could do anything for $280,000 a year. I could do anything to work online, see my panel of patients, and live in like another state or be on vacation, then I would say no, it's not worth it for you. It really depends on your passion is really what it comes down to. Are you passionate about the population you're taking care of? If you're not, if you don't like psych patients, you're only doing it for the schedule and for the money, don't do it. My biggest piece of advice really for any healthcare profession: shadow. Shadow a CRNA, shadow a nurse practitioner, shadow a physician, shadow a clinical nurse specialist, shadow a midwife, shadow whoever you are thinking about becoming, and see if that's for you. That's the big test to see if that's what you want to do, is go spend some time. It may take more than one shift. It may take a week. It may take a month. Go spend some time with that profession and really determine, is this for me? That's what I want to leave you with today. Is it worth it to be a Psych NP? My big answer is yes, if that's what you're passionate about. No, if you're trying to go for the salary or for the work schedule. Comment below. Let me know. Do you think it's worth it to be a psychiatric nurse practitioner? If you are a psychiatric nurse practitioner, comment below. Let me know what you think, if you are fulfilled in your career, or if you have any advice for people considering your career. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.